Hello, and today I will be reading you a spooky story. More bones, scary stories from around the world.
The Haunted Violin, Germany. Even the magician couldn't stop the passage of time. When his long life was about to end, he asked a carpenter to make his coffin. "Use wood from this tree," he said, pointing to one that shaded his doorstep. "It sprang from the ground the day I was born. Be sure to use it for my coffin, and for nothing else." For nothing else? This seemed strange to the carpenter, but he was even more surprised when the magician said, "Treat the wood gently. Take care not to make it cry." The carpenter couldn't imagine a tree crying, but he wanted to make the coffin, so he agreed to do exactly what the magician asked. He listened hard when he felled the tree and cut it into boards, but he heard nothing unusual. No crying, unless the wood's voice was muffled by the sound of his saw. When the old magician died, the carpenter sanded boards for the coffin. He saw that the wood was magnificent, dark and straight-grained. It was much too lovely to bury under the dirt. Carpenter couldn't decide what to do. Should he use the wood as he pleased, or should he honor the magician's wish? In the end, he reluctantly used the wood for the coffin and delivered it in time for the magician's burial. When he returned to his workshop, the carpenter stared at the few boards that were left over. Surely the magician wouldn't want them to go to waste, he thought. It would make an excellent violin. I'll start working on it tomorrow. That night, however, the old magician burst into his dreams. "Don't you dare use my wood for a violin," he said. "Don't do it." The carpenter awoke. He lay there thinking for a moment, but he never paid attention to dreams. Besides, he was tired, so he turned over and went back to sleep. The very next day, he began carving the wood. He labored over it for weeks until he had made an elegant violin, handsomely shaped and beautifully polished. He could hardly wait to hear how it sounded. But in order to play it, he had to make a bow. "I'll begin first thing in the morning," he told himself. That night, the dead magician returned. "Now you have done it," he told the carpenter, "and it will be much worse if you make a bow." The carpenter was feeling a bit uneasy when he awoke, but again he dismissed his dream. He worked hard all day, shaping and varnishing the bow, but he couldn't try it out until morning when the varnish had dried. He went to bed, and again he dreamed about the magician. The dead man was very angry. "This is your last chance," he said. "Do not play that violin." The next morning the carpenter felt a twinge of fear, but he knew that nothing had happened when he had finished making the violin. Why should he worry about playing it? He hurried to his workshop, strung the bow, took down the violin, and began to play. He was not a skilled violinist, so he was astounded by the haunting melody that arose. It seemed to spring forth on its own, crying like a dirge sung at a funeral. But no sooner had he finished playing than the room turned dark. He rushed to the window and leaned out to see if the sun had eclipsed, but all he saw was more darkness. Suddenly, invisible hands picked him up and thrust him out the window. The carpenter tumbled down and sank into something soft. He realized with horror that it was quicksand sucking him into the earth. He thrashed about wildly, but it was too late. The quicksand dragged him under as he drew his last breath. When the carpenter's son entered the workshop later that morning, he found his father's body lying on the floor, with the violin clutched in his hands. The son was distraught. He didn't know what had happened, But that night the same magician visited the son's dreams to tell him what had taken place. The son awoke confused. What sort of magic was in that tree? One thing the son knew for sure: that violin was dangerous. He arose at dawn and burned it. As it went up in flames, he thought he heard a voice crying out from afar. Was the soul of the carpenter being tortured somewhere, or was that the voice of the magician crying out from his grave?